Welcome back to the discussion Bringing Small Business into the Defense World, sponsored by ProPricer on Federal News Network. My guest today is Michael Weaver. He's the Director of Operations at ProPricer, and I'm your moderator, Scott Maucione. So, Michael, we were talking about pricing earlier, the importance of accurate pricing. What kind of strategies can companies use when they're pricing their bids, when they're trying to decide what they want to quote the government? So is it better sometimes to go a little lower to work with your competition and maybe outbid them a bit? Is it all about accuracy? Where would you kind of consult with companies and help them out in those sorts of ways?
Well, the risk involved with going a little bit over, or going a little bit under, is definitely there. It really depends on the contract type. So if you're restricted in saying, hey, we're going to do it for this cost and that's what it's going to be, if you underbid by too much, you could really hurt your profitability there. And so, you may win a contract that you really don't want to win because you've put the wrong numbers in place. Where I think that it really helps is having really good coordination between the estimating and pricing teams. A lot of times that they're at odds with each other. The estimating team does things a certain way and they've got to get it to pricing for them to go in and be able to build up and find that things are priced right, or that the statements of work and the basis of estimate and all of that's undergone the peer review and the proposal review. So getting those teams to work together, I think, is really important. But a step above that or beyond that, I think it's really important to understand how your rates work. A lot of times, especially in the small business world, we've had customers that have come in and said, well, what should I use for an overhead rate? And that's not really something that anybody can tell you other than the people that you have working in your finance group. And so as you start hitting that threshold where you have to start disclosing those numbers and you get audited, you want to make sure that you're not being kicked back or that you're not getting any challenges put against you because you can't justify any of your your overhead rate or your G&A rate or any of your unrecovered costs and how you've allocated those into your proposal. It's really important to make sure that the garbage in, garbage out, right? It's really important to make sure that you've got the ability to justify what the numbers are, whether they come from the estimating group and that your subject matter experts really know what they're talking about. And that can be hard to do when it comes to things like new technology or new materials that are being used. You may have new types of jigs or tooling that you have to accommodate that you've never done before. And so it makes it really hard to get an accurate cost when you're doing new business. So having faith in the fact that your numbers are correct and that you've got the right people in place to help you get there is going to help you go a long way with getting the right numbers and not worrying about strategies as far as should I underbid or should I overbid. It's more about can I get the right bid in? And if we do our job right, then we're going to be more competitive.
It sounds like a lot of self-awareness, honestly. Like if you
yeah.
aware of your company and what you're doing, that's the best way to go about it, right?
Right. And know what your capabilities are. Really, making sure that you're actually spending time doing the numbers and making sure that they're all right so that there aren't any hidden costs or things that you didn't account for. Really doing the job well in the beginning makes it easier. And if there's something wrong, then when you get into the negotiations and you're working with the agency, it's great to just be upfront. The combative relationship that sometimes exists between contractors and agencies is something that could really go away just with a couple of human conversations and saying, hey, we screwed up here, or this is something that we can fix or that we can address, and really sharing and working through the negotiation process with a collaborative environment rather than it being combative and us saying it's us versus you. Sitting down and working with the agency or working with the contractor to make sure that you really are doing what's best for the warfighter and the taxpayer.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about how DoD is trying to become a better buyer and work with companies in the ways that you talked about. The Defense Department has a huge market and demand right now for working with commercial companies that already have products that are out there. There's agencies like AFWERX and DUI that are trying to use things like you were talking about, OTAs and that sort of stuff. What sort of strategies are they using? How well do you think that those are working? And would you suggest working with them as well?
I think I would absolutely work with them. We're actively trying to work with more and more of them. So I would say that everyone should be trying to work with a government agency. It helps us to create better products and to be more innovative in our approach. Going back to that technologies created and technologies used, by providing the expertise that we're spending a lot of money on developing new and innovative technologies, and by incorporating those into the goods and services that the government buys, I think that's just helpful for everybody. And I'd certainly want to be a part of it. I would hope that a lot of those small businesses would want to be too. I would say that it's a lot easier to be a commercial company and just say, here's what my off-the-shelf price is. There's no discounts, or I can come up with whatever discount that I want. And that there's a lot more rules involved when dealing with government contracting. I think that the OTAs and the SBIRs are a great way of the government understanding that that's the case and trying to streamline that and make it easier for those small businesses who've never had to deal with that level of granularity or detail before, and saying, is there a product out there that somebody else could do? Is there a product out there that somebody else already does? Can two or more people do this? Where should this be competitive and where shouldn't it be? Where should we just be able to go and look off the shelf and say, hey, the market has determined what that price is and we're willing to spend that money and get it, because it saves us time from competing and getting all of this RFP put together. There's a COTS product that we can just purchase off the shelf. I think it's great when we have the ability to cut a lot of that red tape out of the way and just say, that product works, it's great, let's buy it and let's move on. Let's just move on.
Acquisition has changed a lot in the past probably 8 to 5 years. We've seen tons of reforms coming from Congress, and we've talked about the expansion of OTAs. How do you think acquisition is going to be changing in the future, in the next couple of years? And how's the Defense Department trying to be a better buyer in that way?
Well, I'd like to see a little bit more artificial intelligence involved. So, the speed at which AI can go in and monitor these transactions and try to help you find, details where you may have missed, or just the ability to go in and have something run sort of on autopilot that's always learning, I think is a great way that we can change acquisition in the future. A couple of things that I would like to do is to create more of a centralized data source. It was actually on a panel that we did with FNN a couple of years ago, where we sat down with a lot of program officers and contract officers and administration to kind of listen to what the pain points are that they really had. And some of the stories that they told were kind of eye-opening for me sitting in the room. And we were talking about, hey, we may have purchased something like this before and we may have gotten a better price on it this time, but we still don't know if we're getting a good price compared to anyone else that's purchased it or something like it in the past. Being able to share that data, or as a contractor submits a set of forward pricing rate agreements to an agency, having DCMA being able to share that information a little bit more effectively and quicker, or even allowing different agencies to pool together and buy at higher values. So if two or more agencies can pool together, or even within an agency, to be able to go across all of their agency and say, who else needs this? And let's make sure that we all buy it at the same time, is a great way to get a better price on the types of goods and services that they use. So I hope that there's a little bit more of a centralized platform. I think that CBAR was a good start, but I think that there's a lot of room to improve for being able to go in and see what other people paid for things. And I think it would be great to be a part of that, to be able to go in and build an application that sits there and monitors, all of the buying and spending that the government does for them to share with each other, controlled, of course, and to allow them to be able to say, hey, who else needs to buy this widget, or who else needs to buy this tank or aircraft, and pulling together those resources and seeing what everybody's spending will help everybody get a better deal.
So you talked about how creating some sort of repository for good data about pricing can really help the Defense Department. Would that be a win-win situation, in the sense that it could help the Defense Department save money while also helping these companies maybe make better profits, or give the Defense Department what it needs better?
Well, it's definitely going to be a win for the government, because especially when it comes to generating the IGCEs, being able to go in and say, okay, if we're going to let this RFP out and we want to know how much something is going to cost, can we base it on any work that's already been previously performed? Or can we take bits and pieces of other projects and sort of allow our technical evaluators to go in, or the people that are building that IGCE up, and say, hey, we think we know what the number of hours or the type of people that should be doing this work are, and giving them access to more and more information, and being able to catalog that in a way where they're not just looking for that information and having it be readily available. This is where I think the AI, comes in handy. is that as you start writing an RFP, wouldn't it be great if it says, oh, by the way, somebody else did something just like this. It's within 90% of the criteria that you're writing, or some of the CLINs or WBS structures match. I think that's very beneficial for the government to be able to say, okay, let me use some of these bits and pieces of this and factor things up or down or make adjustments to it so that our IGC is a little bit more effective and it helps us, do a little bit better on the buying side. From the contractor side, they probably hate me for saying everything that I just said, giving the government the power to say, I know that we're not getting a good deal, but I would hope that their commitment would be to being competitive, knowing that other companies out there, especially the small businesses coming up in the world, and being able to do more and more of the level of effort on a proposal. I would hope that those contractors would want to be more competitive in doing what it takes to compete with all of the other companies that were going to be doing the same thing, because somebody's always going to try to undercut you. Somebody's always going to try to do it less. We want you to get the right thing done for the right price rather than sacrificing one for the other.
We've got about 90 seconds left, and I wanted to ask something about the supply chain. It's something that's been affecting the way that companies have to work, considering the United States is looking for different ways to supply certain materials, and then also that certain materials are just not as available. How has that affected businesses, especially during this COVID environment? Well,
COVID has had a pretty crazy impact on everyone. It's not just about supply chain, but I don't think we have the time to get into that. We've seen some goods and services actually really increase in price, just from a personal perspective. I can think about going to Home Depot or Lowe's and taking a look at the price of lumber and seeing that the demand is so high for it that the prices are skyrocketing. And I think that the same thing is holding true to some of the goods and services that the government is buying. So it means even more diligence is needed when it comes to creating a competitive price, making sure that you're not sacrificing your profit for charging less for the materials and you're going to be, paying for yourself, and making sure that the government isn't being overcharged just because the cost of those goods and services is going up. So it's going to take a lot more coordination than I think we've ever had to deal with before. And I'm hoping that the innovation that the DoD is putting out there really helps us all spend our tax dollars a little bit more effectively.
Well, Michael, it's been a real pleasure today. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, absolutely. It was great getting a chance to talk to you. Thank you.
Michael Weaver is the Director of Operations at ProPricer, and I'm your moderator, Scott Maucione. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on the discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search ProPricer.